around.
Cool.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this event this evening. We've got speakers here from Angels. Hopefully you're here to hear all about neurodiversity in children and young people. My name's Tara Belcher. I'm a GP in Hitchin and the Clinical Director of Hitchin and Whitwell Primary Care Network. Just wanted to remind you of all the fabulous staff that we already have in our primary care team, and also take this opportunity to invite you to join our patient participation group, which is how we brought this education event to you today. So we see our PPG as providing access to these sort of education events, also possibly having a volunteer role, and also communicating with our practices and with the PCN. So if you're interested in joining the PPG and getting the first information about events like this evening and getting your voice heard, then please do sign up using this email address here. We have got a website and
have we lost Tara?
Talked to us about this. So let me stop sharing. And I will hand over. I was going to hand over to Bethan, but I'm seeing Lise.
That's fine. I think that'll be fine.
Hi. So shall I start, Bethan?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. My name's Lisa Cooper, and I'm the parent support manager and founder of Angels. We're a charity that originally started in Hitchin, supporting families with children who have autism, who are autistic, or who have ADHD. And we started about 20 years ago now, when my son was just 4, and he's now 25 next week. So I'm the parent of 2 now young adults, 2 grown men who are autistic with ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions as well. And I myself am also diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And Bethan, do you want to say a bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm Bethan. So I work at Angels. So you might see me out and about. So I work as a fundraiser and I work in the marketing as well. So I'm a parent of 2 young children who one has a provisional diagnosis of autism and the other is just over 2 years on the autism pathway due to be assessed. So I was a member of Angels, accessing their support before I became to work for them.
So Tara's asked us this evening if we would come and do a session around neurodiversity in children. And so we're hoping that we can cover some of the questions that you might have. It's a huge topic, obviously. So we'll tell you a little bit about Angels and a little bit about the conditions, and we're hoping that we'll have some time for questions from you, because actually probably that's going to be more useful, because there's so many different bits of information. So when we talk about neurodiversity, it's a sort of an umbrella label, if you like, that covers a lot of conditions that are basically around different development in the brain and different neurological conditions of the brain. And so we've got here on this slide is quite a helpful one that shows you all of the different things that are part of neurodiversity, that can be part of neurodiversity. And often children who are neurodivergent, or adults, anyone who's neurodivergent, will have one or more of these conditions. So there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of comorbidity. For example, one of my sons is autistic and has ADHD, also has intellectual disability and epilepsy, and my other son has autism, ADHD, and a and Tourette's, so you can, and probably dyslexia and dyscalculia as well. So you can see that it's almost like there's like a soup. Quite often people who are neurodivergent, we have like a soup of different ingredients in it, which is all part of the reason why everyone who's neurodivergent is very different. I mean, the whole thing about divergent means that you're all different. So yeah, so with Angels, when we were set up as a charity, we covered we stated that we support autism and ADHD, but actually within that we also have quite a lot of knowledge and can support on all of those other conditions that were on that slide as well. It's just that it can't be in our name. So yeah, so this is our team at Angels. We're all parents of children, or now mostly adults, across the board, who are autistic with ADHD and all of those other things as well. So, and we're a friendly bunch, and we're all fairly local to North Herts or Stevenage. So yeah, that's us. So yeah, so we just said a little bit about Angels. We set up in Hitchin in 2004. And essentially, we're a charity, so we're supported by funding grants from the National Lottery and other funders like Hearts Community Foundation, and our services are online. We sort of discovered the online world since COVID, so it's now quite we don't just do face-to-face, we do online as well, and we support over 3,000 families. So do you want to go on to the next slide? Thanks. So basically, the purpose of what we do at Angels is to walk alongside you, to support you, so that you can build an understanding of your child's condition and their rights, so that you can make sure that you're able to learn strategies and skills to support your child's development and their emotional health and well-being, find ways to adapt their environment to meet their needs, advocate for them in the education, health and social care systems, and just to reduce isolation, really, so that you feel that you're part of a community and that you're not the only family that is different, because obviously there are 3,000 families around and about that are in a similar situation. So there is really lots of experience, lots of knowledge amongst our families, that you know, at our meetings there's always going to be someone there that has been through what you're going through, or what might be a challenge for you at that time. And the idea is that, so we try to be really positive about the conditions, and about the great things that being neurodivergent can bring to us as individuals, as families, and to society in general. But as part of that, we obviously recognise that what we need to do is help to empower you and your child so that they can reach their potential, because quite often our society and the systems that we have to live in are not necessarily neurodivergent friendly, so there can be quite a challenge, and so it's about having a voice so you can explain what you need, and just generally trying to improve things for everyone. Okay.
So we say beneath every behaviour there is a feeling, and beneath every feeling there is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focus on the behaviour, we begin to deal with the cause and not the symptom. And this really sums up how we kind of approach things. And we see every behaviour as a form of communication. And it's for us to dig deeper and understand what is causing that behaviour, rather than focus on the behaviour in itself. So we're going to look at what is autism. So this is really kind of broad. So autism is a lifelong difference. You're born autistic and you'll die autistic. It doesn't come on at a certain point and it doesn't go. And it's known to be caused by differences in the brain and the way that it functions. And individuals can be affected in many, many different ways, and that's why we refer to it as a spectrum. So broadly, it presents with communication difficulties. So you might spot some delayed speech, impaired comprehension. You might find that the child is taking the speech literally. You say, pull up your socks, and they literally do that. They don't understand kind of speech that isn't it's direct. And there can also be like a lack or limited non-verbal communication as well. Often social interaction is impaired, so there might be difficulties with relationships and having that back and forth interaction, that two-way conversation. Processing, so difficulties with flexibility of thought, with change, with transitions, with fairness. So often autistic people really have an issue with things being fair, and they need to be by the book. And when unexpected things happen, that can lead to kind of the meltdown or the different behaviours that we see, which kind of stem from the child needing to be in control of their situation and know what's coming next. So in school, we might see the now and next boards being used, and kind of visuals, timetables, so they know what to expect and when, so they can stay in control. Sensory needs, so this can be really vast. So you can find some people with sensory sensitivities to loud noises, for example, and you can see that kind of really having an impact on behaviour and anxiety levels as well. Or you can see the total Polaroid opposite, so lack of sensitivity, not feeling pain. You can see children that need that input, that sensory seeking behaviour, because they need that input. And then just to highlight that girls often present very, very differently to boys. So girls are actually 3 times less likely to get an autism diagnosis than a boy. And that's because their traits are often very subtle. They're better at masking. They're more socially aware. So each autistic person is unique with a different profile of strengths and weaknesses. So what we used to think, or what some people still think autism is like you're a little bit autistic or you're very autistic, and that is not the case at all. Each autistic person is an individual, and what it can actually look like is just a different profile, like a fingerprint. We're all different, and we can have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And you might hear the term spiky profile being used, and that's in relation to that. So having being really good in one area and actually struggling in another.
So a little bit about ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there are sort of different, there's different what they call different profiles of ADHD. So you can have inattentive ADHD, where essentially you don't necessarily have hyperactivity, but you have the difficulty in focus and in keeping attention on things. And you can have hyperactive ADHD, where there's a real, like, you can really see that clear hyperactive behavior. It might be physical behavior, but it could also be just being like sort of a very, your brain is running super fast, and you might be really chatty, talking 19 to the dozen. You know, when you've got a child like that, you just like, you can't keep up with what they're saying. And then there's a combined type, which is sort of all of it together. Our best understanding of it is that it's caused by a deficit of certain chemicals in the brain. Essentially, the neurotransmitters are out of balance, so it's very difficult for messages to be passed through the brain. So essentially, it's almost like, if you think of an example of you give a child an instruction to do something, and they because the chemical reaction that passes that message from their hearing through their processing into them remembering it, processing it and doing it, there's a breakdown in that. So they may only get the first part of the message, and then they miss the rest of the message, and then they get the second part of the last part of the message. So you get this sort of breakdown where they can't remember what they've been asked, they can't remember what it was that they were going to do, and it's really difficult. It's a lifelong condition. Medication can help, so we do have some medications that can help with that chemical imbalance, and they work. There's a number of different ones, and they work in different ways. They're not effective for everyone, and there's a lot of it can take a while to get the right balance, but definitely that can be quite supportive in helping to focus and for those messages to get through, and so that can happen. So you have difficulties with attention impulsivity is the other part of it as well. It's almost as if there's no break, there's no functionality to think, hang on a minute, if I do this thing, what will happen? So if something comes into your head, you just go ahead and do it or say it. Another aspect of it is that you can have real difficulty with emotional regulation, and emotions can feel so overwhelming. So it's almost like quite often people with ADHD describe how they feel their emotions so intensely. There's no sort of like feeling okay or feeling mildly annoyed. They're straight into full-blown anger or full-blown, distress. Everything is really heightened. It's sort of all or nothing. All of these difficulties can mean that they can have problems learning in class. It impacts on their behavior. So quite often they'll have low self-esteem associated with it, because they're not getting it right, they're making mistakes, they're not following instructions. And essentially challenging behavior that can either be as a result of the impulsivity, the difficulty in regulating emotions, just so much. It's just so very difficult. The best description that I ever had that someone gave me with my son, who's very ADHD, my younger one's very ADHD, was it's almost as if they literally live in the 4 seconds that they're in right now. So he couldn't think of consequences beyond the next 4 seconds, and he couldn't really remember what had just happened just before. So he would be doing something and you could tell him to stop doing it, and he would stop, but then 4 seconds later he would just start again because he'd forgotten that you told him. And particularly when he was younger, it was very much like that. So you can imagine the impact that can have on your life. And another big part of it, actually, with both conditions, and a lot of is the difficulties with what we call executive functioning. So difficulties with organisation and planning. Your ADHD child is the one that forgets their PE kit, doesn't have the right equipment. You give them something to put away and they just leave it somewhere else because they forget what it was that you asked them to do with it. It just really, really difficult. I mean, my son, I think when he was at secondary school, at least 3 separate occasions I picked him up from school and he didn't have his shoes on his feet. So things like that, because he just would forget them or lose them or whatever. It's just really, that's a real challenge for I think even into adulthood. It's one of the things that is a real challenge for adults with ADHD as well. Okay, so for the next slide. So yeah, we were talking about low self-esteem, and we've got research that sort of tells us that by the time a typical child with ADHD is 10 years old, they'll have had 20,000 more negative comments about themselves than a neurotypical child will have. So that's a real thing that we need to bear in mind if our children are like this. And it's not necessarily that people won't. It might not be you as a parent. It might not be people doing it deliberately, but they'll be aware that they're different and that they're getting it wrong from their peers, in sort of school, when they're told that they've got to, like, why have you done that? Why have you forgotten that again? So what we need to do a lot of the time as parents is really find as many reasons as we can to give them positive feedback to sort of negate all that negativity and build their self-esteem up, and help them to understand that there are real positives around ADHD. The sort of like the creativity, the the energy, the sort of desire to do things differently, all of that. So it's about finding those positives when they get it right, and making sure that we do that. This slide's from NeuroWorld, who I think is on Instagram, and she's really good. She's got some really good information and resources. So I just thought I'd say that while we were on that slide. Okay, so Next.
Yeah.
To you, Bethan.
Yeah, so our services, we run support groups in person and online, so daytime and evenings. So we run 4 evening support groups a term. So we run our support during term times. We have a variety of online workshops that change every term. So we have a different program that comes out. So our next one will be out after Easter. We've got one more workshop to run this term. We have a one-to-one personalised support service, which can support you with anything to do with your child, and even includes supporting at meetings with professionals. We have a closed facilitated Facebook group. We've currently got around 850 parents in that group, and it's a lovely, supportive, non-judgmental environment where you can ask questions, share information, and gain support from people that know and that are walking in the same shoes as you or similar, so they really get it. We've got social media channels, so we're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're a little bit on Twitter, where we update with content and keep you updated of what's going on. And we've got weekly podcasts on Spotify, which they come out every Monday, and we've covered around 25 topics now. But we see it as you can write into us and let us know what topics you want us to cover, so you respond to what people want to know about. This is a snapshot of our workshops, some of them that have run. So they've really varied. So we've run ones on understanding ADHD, to looking at women and girls and how autism and ADHD present in girls, managing meltdowns. Yeah, so every term they change. And obviously emotionally based school avoidance as well, we cover most terms, because actually that's a growing issue. So our one-to-one service. So we support parents, carers who find access in a group support difficult or needs issues that are not easy to talk about in a group setting. So like we mentioned earlier, we can support at meetings or appointments with professionals such as school or social care, and we can help you advocate or be part of a team supporting you. And we've got a lot of experience of working with neurodivergent parents as well, because obviously there's a genetic link and often parents are neurodivergent themselves. This is from one of our members who was given support from Angels, and it was just lovely to see the outcome. And actually her autistic son was helped so much by the charity. We helped him be able to access a specialist school, and now he's thriving and looking forward to going on and moving on to college. So we love hearing kind of the outcome of the support. So how you can access us. So we have an online membership form that you can get via scanning the QR code on our leaflets and on the screen, or you can visit our website, and under the Join Us section, there's a membership application form. So every week we email our members with details of the support that you can access, and we'll include Zoom links. You'll be invited to join our closed Facebook group, and all our support is free of charge, and it's for those with a diagnosis or awaiting diagnosis, or you might be just thinking that something's going on and you're looking into it. You're more than welcome to join us. So I think we wanted to open up to questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we've already got some questions. So first of all, yes, we can definitely share the slides. I don't know, Tara, if that's something, because we obviously don't have everyone's details, but
yeah, I'm sure Dion can get those slides shared. We are recording the meeting.
Yeah, so that's
because we were worried about there being so many people. So
I think we keep losing Tara.
Oh no.
She's frozen. I'll just carry
we're
on.
recording the meeting, so we can get that sent out, and we'll definitely get the slides emailed out to everyone that's joined as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Sorry,
right.
I just got booted out then. That's bizarre.
It's a bit temperamental, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just go through some of the questions we've got. When considering ADHD and diagnosing HD, is trauma and what may be happening in the home considered, just to ensure the lived experiences of the child is thought about? Yes, absolutely. So with ADHD assessments, there will be some of the forms you fill out also do pick out whether there are other things going on, and trauma could be one of those things. And with autism and ADHD, when their diagnostic assessment happens, there is discussion around sort of life experiences and what has happened throughout the child's development. So it is definitely something that is also considered. But you know, and sometimes, because sometimes as well, it's about unpicking whether a presentation is down to the trauma or not, but also bearing in mind that it is obviously very possible that there could be trauma and autism or ADHD. Hopefully that answers the question. So the different kinds of medication, there is a lot of information. Usually when you're given a diagnosis of ADHD, the paediatrician will give you some leaflets about medication, about the medications they're thinking about. We've obviously got quite a lot of first-hand experience around medication and medicating our children, and essentially it is very much, it's a really individualized sort of process. But it's quite helpful. I found it quite helpful to understand that, particularly with the frontline medications that they offer. So the stimulants, the methylphenidate ones, they're essentially something that goes into your system and then comes out again. So that if you try them and they're not effective, or you don't feel happy with them, there isn't a long-term effect. So I mean, there's lots of information online. There's lots of I think the NHS website has some quite good information around the different medications that are used for ADHD. Yeah, so I'm just have a look and see what other questions. I'm in the chat at the moment rather than in the question and answers, so I'll get over there as soon as I can.
I'm just having a look at the quick Q&As, and one of the questions was, do you support families with a dual diagnosis of autism and learning disability?
Absolutely, yes, definitely.
Super.
Lots of our children are in that situation, and yes, so the whole with autism and all the way through from all of them. I mean, obviously my own son, my eldest, he has severe learning disability, went to a severe learning disability school, and now is under the learning disability sort of umbrella as an adult. So yeah, lots of experience of that, and the different challenges that you have with that as well. So we definitely do.
Brilliant. There's also a question about whether people who are in other counties are able to access your support, or are you limited to
No, absolutely. We do all of Hertfordshire and all the bits around the outside, and actually we have a lot of parents from Central Beds and South Cambridgeshire, and then we'll absolutely all over the country really, but obviously for people further afield, it's most of our support will need to be online, sort of like on Teams and stuff like that, but we, because our one-to-one service, if you're local, if you're sort of within sort of like 15 miles of Letchworth, we can do one-to-one support we can support you in meetings at schools and things like that. So yes, definitely there isn't that we don't have a boundary at all.
Brilliant. And then also on the Q&A screen, I think you've probably answered this. Do you run any courses on ADHD medication and choices?
We don't have a course as such, but we do have workshops that cover it. And like Bethan was saying, we change our workshop sort of suites every term depending on the needs of the people that are coming up. We also have the podcast. I'm just thinking, actually, I don't think we've done one on medication, so that's definitely one we could do. Yeah, because and just have that general discussion about it. But yeah, we do and and absolutely, you could have a one-to-one appointment to discuss your particular situation as well. If
Brilliant.
it was something that you
sounds
didn't want to.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Then there is the one last question on the Q&As, although I suspect there are lots more in the chat. Is it, practically speaking, what support can be offered to a child by you guys with do you have specific sessions for children with a suspected diagnosis?
No, so we work with the parents. Essentially, our support is for parents, but there is support that is for children, depending very much on what the support is that's required. Essentially, usually through the services that they're accessing. So within there's support for sort of like mental health, and there's support for a lot of support through schools, but it depends what sort of thing that you're looking for. We do holiday activities for children, so that's the sort of thing that we do offer for children, is that we do I can't remember what.
So at Hitchin Boys School, we run trampolining. So we're looking to run it again over the summer holidays, and also in Stevenage, we do pottery painting at Greenside Studio. So they're connected to the Greenside School. And it's just a nice opportunity to bring children together where there's no judgment, they can be themselves. And yeah, we've had really positive feedback from parents who also have come along and felt that they belong and that they can be there without any judgment.
Yeah, and siblings can come as well, so that they get that support too. That it's about building that feeling of community, and that feeling that your family isn't different, your family is okay, and you know, we're all there and we get it, you know.
So there are a couple of questions I might be able to answer. Is it easier for me to give you the questions and then you answer them rather than you scrolling up and down through them?
Yeah,
maybe?
that is actually really great. Thank you,
Great.
Tara.
So so there's a question about, is there a shortage of ADHD medication at the moment? Yes. There is, and we don't know when that's going to improve. There's also a question about the wait time to see a paediatrician for diagnosis. To be honest, at the moment, we're looking at probably 2 to 3 years as a waiting time. And there's another question about, can they dual diagnose ADHD and autism? Actually, locally, that's a bit of an issue because there are separate pathways for ADHD and autism, and we are trying to get them to look at both together, and it's quite difficult. So towards the end of this, I am just going to tell you a bit about our social prescribers who are about to come into post, who may be at least able to help you with some of the forms that need to be filled in when you're going to be looking for your children to be referred, and also we'll be talking about the support that's available before, which is exactly where Angels comes in here, because so much can be done even if you haven't got a diagnosis. While you're sitting in that ridiculously long waiting list, you can be putting in so much support. Much better to start early. So one of the questions is, could you talk through the signs to look out for in toddlers and young children?
So in toddlers, so because it's very different, because I'll start again. So the sorts of signs you might see in very young children are when you often don't see anything until they're around about 2, because developmentally there's not really anything that you'd notice that's that much different. With my eldest son, we started noticing things from when he was around about 2, because he didn't. That's the sort of age when children start interacting with each other, and he just didn't do that. So he wasn't so interested in other children. He didn't really like sharing toys or playing alongside them. He would just sort of like push other kids out of the way if they were trying to get too near to him and stuff like that. Speech delay is also quite a common one in very young children that you might see. So not having the usual amount of words, or they might have no speech, or they might have just a few words. For my son, he had single words, but he didn't start putting them into sort of structured sentences in the way that you would normally expect, so that his delay was there. often there's delays with things like toileting, and sleeping can be difficult. Getting them off to sleep, having them stay asleep can be difficult. Quite often, as well, as they get a little bit older, difficulties around having a restricted diet. So we quite commonly see that they'll be very rigid around what they'll eat or how it's presented, and that's quite a common thing that's associated with it, because quite often there's sensory differences, and that difference of that restricted diet thing often has its basis in sensory issues that there might be. I'm just trying to think of what else you might see. My son was very active, used to run away, wouldn't respond to his name being called. But and quite often we were talking about it in our podcast that we've just done, that will be out in a couple of weeks, about those early days, and how many of our children sort of failed the hearing test because they didn't respond to their name being called or the bell being rung behind them or whatever. But actually, that we knew that they could hear, because my son could hear me open a packet of crisps from the bottom of the garden. So I knew there was nothing wrong with his hearing, but he didn't respond when you called his name. So they're the sort of more classic signs, really, I think.
And clothing
Thank you.
sensitivity I found as well. So like not wanting to wear shoes and socks, not wanting to wear a coat when it was cold, not feeling kind of the heat or the cold as well.
And so one of the questions on here is also about, if you do notice these sorts of things, how long do you wait before you start trying to get some help for that?
So I think it's just sort of keeping an eye on it and thinking about it. I think we've got a page on our website that talks about what to do if you suspect your child might be neurodivergent. And one of the things that we sort of say is talk to their school or their preschool or whoever it is, and see if they notice anything as well, because they are all trained in child development. So whereas we as parents, for me, it was my first child, so I didn't know what I was comparing him to, or what what he was supposed to be like. He was just him. But talking to people who are trained in child development, so they can see them in the context of all of the children that they've got, and they'll know whether those difficulties are something which might be expected, because all children develop at different rates, or whether it is something that needs to be further investigated. And talk to your health professionals as well. So if you've got a health visitor or your GP, definitely have those conversations with them. And I think, it's a big, saying how long do you wait? I think it is a tricky question, because there's a part of it that's also it's when you as a parent feel that it's the right time. We always say to parents, sort of make a diary of the incidents that happen, or the things that you notice that you think that's a bit different. I'm not sure that is what I'd expect to see. Have a diary, or just make a note on your phone of all of those things, because then you'll soon sort of notice actually how long that you've been seeing these things and how many things you're seeing. And then also, when you do start to have those conversations with the health professionals, you'll have you won't have forgotten anything. It'll all be there written down. So I think that's a really a good tip, is to just make notes in your phone or in a diary or whatever, so that you've got that sort of background of evidence for when you start having those chats.
Brilliant. I think there's a couple of people asking, do you need a diagnosis to get your support? I think we're absolutely saying no, you don't need to be diagnosed to get support from Angels. There's a couple of things here. One person's put on here, have people been using the right to choose to get a diagnosis? Yes, people have been, but actually what we've found is that some of the external private providers are closing their books as well, because there is too much, they've got too long waits. And actually the guidance from the local powers that be is that actually, if a private provider suggests prescribing ADHD medication, that we shouldn't be in primary care as the NHS, we shouldn't be issuing it. So I'm not sure how much it really helps unless you're also happy to get the medication from the private provider too. There's a question here that I think we happily have some teachers on the call who have said, how can teachers support these children and you guys and the work you're doing?
So for teachers, I think there's quite a lot of resources, because I know it's not initially part of teacher training. There's in Hertfordshire, we've got the Send SAS service, specialist advisory service for communication and autism, that can give advice to schools and training for schools. I think all of our schools have got SENCOs who are trained and sort of do know, so it's definitely worth touching base with your Senko and asking for some advice. But I think a big part of it from a parent's perspective is around, as parents, we are the experts in our children. We know our children better than anyone else. And what we need to be able to do is work collaboratively with the professionals that are supporting our children, because you've got that professional knowledge and that experience and that specialization in the area that you're working in. And we can marry that up with the information about our child. So I mean, the best sort of outcomes you have are when you've got that really positive relationship and we work really well together, for parents. So I think that's a really important part of it as well. But I mean, I know that Hertfordshire have training for schools on autism and ADHD through the advisory service that schools can access, and I think it's free at the moment, so it's definitely worth exploring.
There's a question about what about if standalone dyslexia or dyscalculia or something like that? Are you able to support with those elements on their own?
Technically, if on their own, we're not really supposed to, because our charity is autism and ADHD, but you know, like we can give some advice, but I mean, locally we've got the Dyspraxia Foundation, if it's dyspraxia, who are luckily the national charities based in Hitchin, and they've got loads of advice. And I mean, for dyslexia, again, it would probably be signposting you to the sort of like all of the national information for specific stuff. It is a bit tricky because we do need to, there needs to sort of be that autism ADHD bit in there somewhere. But again, it's, if you're looking at
but you might
how
know
you get it
where
assessed.
you could probably
we
help
would
people
know.
to know where to look, which is great.
Yeah.
There's a question here about, are any of these conditions related to food? Do we think? Is there anything?
No. No,
Super.
although no, so you mean like caused by food, so like too much sugar or something like that? No, I don't think. I think that there evidence shows us that it's a difference in the way that the brain is, and I don't think we've got much evidence that there's a link with diet at all. That said, obviously we know that diet can affect a lot of things, and the effects of, say, for example, having too much sugar are the same as they would be for any other child, essentially.
There's an interesting question. Actually, this is, I'm sure, interesting for lots of people. You did mention that with girls it can be much more, you know, the diagnosis is made less often, the traits can be different. Could you give us a bit more information about that and about masking?
Yes, I mean, somebody that was diagnosed at 47, this is something that I sort of know about. It essentially, it seems that often girls, I mean, it's not just girls, because some boys can also mask. It's about, you're trying to do everything you can to fit in. So often we see girls in a school environment, for example, and they are able to go completely under the radar because they copy. They're fantastic at copying the behavior and the speech patterns and following what their peers do without really understanding it. And just not causing any trouble. They're working super hard to make sure that no one ever picks up that they don't really understand what's going on, or they don't really get why things are happening the way they are. So they sort of learn to laugh when everyone else laughs at a joke, even if they don't get it, and they'll sort of know what they're supposed to be doing and follow what the teacher's saying by copying what their friend does. Quite often with girls at school, you see that they are really, really attached to one peer who they feel safe with, and that peer is essentially supporting them without the realizing and sort of giving them that sort of, they've got that trusting relationship, and they sort of need that person there because they know that they can copy them. Also often very attached to their primary carer figure, their parent. Often it's mum, because again, we're the ones that are translating the world for them, the social world, because it's that difficulty with social understanding that's really difficult. And essentially, quite often what happens is it takes longer for the differences to be picked up because of that really, that massive effort they're putting into just nobody noticing that they're not getting it. And you typically see it's like when it'll come out when they get home. So they'll get home, they'll be the child that, and actually my son was like this, my youngest one was like this, absolute angel at school. They thought he was fantastic. They thought he was a little bit inattentive and missed stuff, but they didn't really have any knowledge of just how clueless he really was about what was going on. But when he came home, he would explode. And quite often you see that they're putting so much effort in at home, they get home, they explode. All behavior at home is really challenging, and then they quite often also get into a thing where they don't want to go back into school the next day, so that you have this thing where it's a fight, it's a battle to get them in. And it's really difficult because you're having that conversation with school and saying, we think there's something going on here, and they're like, but they're absolutely fine when they're here, because they don't see anything, because that girl is putting all that effort into making sure they never see it. So it's really hard, very challenging. We tend to see that it gets harder when they get to sort of year 5 and 6, because the social development of their peers takes up a step, and they're not quite able to catch up. And then for other girls, they'll sail through that period, they can do that, but then it hits when they get to 14, and everyone else is suddenly interested in boys or whatever it is, and they're still wanting to play with their dolls, or watch the sort of younger television programs and all the rest of it. Another part of it is as well that when we diagnose for autism and we think about the special interests that quite often accompany autistic people that people have, often with boys, those special interests will be things that are quite unusual, or things that we associate with autism, like trains or space or pylons or something quite random. But girls will typically pick a special interest that is something that all girls their age are interested in, but they go into such depth with it. So they're really interested in ponies, for example, like all their friends, but they're absolutely so into it. Or a particular band, or whatever it is that girls are into these days. And it just has much more depth, and they're much more emotionally involved with it than their peers. But at face value, if you look at it, you just think there's nothing to see here, really.
So there's a good question there that says, what's the difference between masking and developing strategies to help them navigate the emotional and social world?
Well, I suppose really so developing strategies is like the next stage on from masking, because with masking you're just sort of pretending in a way, but there's a cost with masking, and it's exhausting and it's tiring, and you don't really understand why you're having to do it, and you forget that you don't have to do it. Whereas I suppose when you've got that understanding of yourself, I'd say as an autistic woman, you have that understanding of yourself, you can move on from having to mask for everyone to actually understanding yourself, accepting yourself, and then being able to use strategies that help you to manage and get by. So it is a strategy in itself, but it's just a really not a long-term effective one. And so I think as an adult, you sort of begin to understand that you need to give yourself breaks from people, you need to look after your own mental health, and understand yourself and what helps you, in a way that when you're masking, all you're thinking about is, I'm just going to make sure that nobody knows that I'm that this is just crazy for me.
Thanks, Lise. So I've still got a few more questions. I'm really aware of time, but nonetheless, it's brilliant that everybody's so engaged. It's fantastic. So there's a question about, are you able to comment much about autism and prodigies and the connection there? I think people think about, Asperger's.
Sorry, Tara, you cut out.
Autism and prodigies.
You cut out then, Tara, sorry.
Can you
right,
hear?
so
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we got that. I suppose really it's just another end of the spectrum, where you've got people that have a high level of intellectual ability, but also the prodigy part of it is what we do have with autism in that special. It's like an extension of that special interest thing, and it's like you have a level of focus on something that is really much more than the usual. So you can have, those sort of, you can have that, you can be so interested in something that it becomes everything. I think generally speaking, there's not this sort of more historically we associated sort of those sort of like I can't think of the word,
Asperger's.
savant abilities with autism, but actually I think that research shows that it's not something that's more than in the general population. It's just that you often see, because of that level of focus, that it's almost like the autism encourages it, if you know what I mean.
There's a question about what is the percentage, what's the prevalence of neurodiversity in the general population?
So I think the latest figures are 1 in 63 in the UK. The National Autistic Society often publish figures. It used to be 1 in 100, but I think at the moment we're sort of sitting about 1 in 63. But in children it's higher because we are better at diagnosing now, and as more adults are getting diagnosed, I think in the last couple of years the number of adult diagnoses has really increased, as that awareness has gone through society. So I don't know, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess at where it'll end up.
There's also a question, so some of the questions on here are things like about online parenting courses, resources for how to respond to children's behaviours and how you teach a child. I think that's probably beyond what we can talk about this evening in terms of detail, but on the slide pack there was lots of information about how to access those resources, and if you get in touch with Lisa and Beth, and I'm sure they can point you in the right direction for all of those sorts of resources. But in terms of other questions that you might be able to help with, do you actually support with getting a diagnosis?
Well, I mean, obviously that's an NHS sort of process. we can support with we do support parents with filling out the forms sometimes, but obviously in Hitchin we're lucky because we've got the social prescribers coming online who will be able to do that. So yeah, I mean we can support with the emotional side of it, because there is sort of an emotional side of it for a lot of parents, and that sort of getting your head around it, coming to terms with it side of things, particularly as sometimes in families we're not all in the same place at the same time, so we sort of emotionally there's a bit of balancing that happens when you go through that process. So we definitely can support with that, but obviously and when we do in some cases go with families to their appointments to support them if they feel like they need some help to explain how their child presents to the person that's doing the assessment.
That sounds
Yeah.
really helpful. There was a question about, but if the waits are so long, what do you do if your child is approaching 16? And there is no easy answer to that. I've had this discussion with secondary care, and they assure me that your child will be seamlessly transferred onto the adult list and will keep their place in the queue. But I don't honestly know, because certainly for ADHD, the adult services are telling us they will only see people who have suspected complex ADHD, and what that means is difficult to put your finger on. I'm just aware that we've technically only got 3 minutes left of this, and I did want to. So one of the final questions was, what is social prescribers? So before I'm just going to very quickly tell you about that, and then we'll come back to Lisa and Beth in case they've got anything that they want to add, and we'll wrap it up. So here in Hitchin and Whitwell, we realised that there was a real need for more support for families, even though Angels do a brilliant job. That there's so many children who there's a concern about neurodiversity. So we've just appointed Natalie and Jane, who are our neurodiversity social prescribers. You'll be able to access them through your GP surgery. You'll get a booked phone triage appointment where they'll give you a ring and arrange an hour's follow-up appointment, which can be either at your home or at the GP surgery or somewhere else where you feel comfortable. And the idea is that they will listen to everything that's going on with you, your child, your children, if they've got siblings, help you put together a personalised care plan, signpost you to different support agencies, get involved with the school if necessary, and help you fill in those referral forms. So they've come into post a good few weeks ago and have been getting to know all the different services that are available. So actually doesn't go live until the 8th of April. If everybody rings on the first day, I suspect we won't have enough appointments, but be aware that they are coming online. So I'm going to stop sharing because I'm just aware of time. And is there anything, Bethan and Lisa, that you'd like to say to wrap up? I can see there's somebody here saying they've got their hand raised and wanted to speak to somebody at the end, but actually, I don't know whether that's really feasible with 100 and something people on the call. It might be better to get in touch with you separately. You're muted, Lisa. And yes, Liz, these social prescribers are only, this is only for children at the moment.
Yeah, so getting in touch with us, you can, if you want to email us, if that's possible, you can email us at support@angelsupportgroup.org.uk. I'll just put it in the chat, and somebody from the group will, one of our team will respond to that. Let me just check I've got that right. So definitely you can get in touch with us that way. Alternatively, so as well as our hidden secret Facebook group for members, we do have a Facebook page that's public facing. So if you're not yet a member and you wanted to ask us a question, you can send us a question through the Facebook group as well. We pick those up. I'm just Yeah, so I mean, just so anybody who does want to get in touch with us, there's that address, or you can join us through our website, and actually you can also contact us through the website. And I think our email addresses are on the website too. And the website is above my head here at www.angelsupportgroup.org.uk.
So can I just like to say a massive thank you, Lisa and Bethan. It's been such an interesting hour. We probably could have gone on for an awful lot longer with so many questions, but I think it's just demonstrated how important and relevant this subject is for so many of our patients in Hitchin and Whitwell. And I suspect we'll be asked to get you guys back, because we had around 300 people who put their names down, and we've had about 120 at most at the time. So presumably there were some people who would have liked to come and for some reason couldn't. Yes, the slides will be sent round. We're hoping that we can actually send round the recording, but we might need to edit it, because we'd hoped it would be recorded in an anonymous fashion, but I can see people's names in the meeting chat, and I don't know whether that will show up on the recording. So we'll have a little look and see whether we're able to edit it so we can actually have the whole recording up. But if not, we will certainly be sending the slides around, and we'll make those available on our PCM website. And for those of you who are patients, practices in Hitchin Whitwell, which I imagine most of you are, there will be a new website going up, and we'll be putting the slides onto that website as well, so that everybody who's a patient will be able to access them. So big thanks again, Lisa and Bethan. Really can't thank you enough. It's been a fantastic evening, and I suspect we'll be getting you back.
You're very welcome. We'd love to come. Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everybody for joining this evening.